Hey, what's up guys? So in this video we are going to see how we can create the Azure network interface using PowerShell, and this is the command that we are going to use, new -az network interface, and this all are the parameter there that you can use. So in this example 1 you can see that this is how you can actually create the network interface card. So you have to use this particular command, then name parameter, then you have to provide the resource group for your NIC, then location, and then the subnet ID. So this is your complete subnet resource ID that you need to mention over here. And then you can provide the IP configuration name and the DNS server. So DNS server is not the mandatory one. So if you have that, you can use that using this particular way. You can just use the single one or the multiple one using the comma. Or if you don't have DNS server, you don't want to provide that in your NIC, you can just exclude this particular parameter. It is not a mandatory one. So in this case, it has actually provided this subnet ID directly on this command. So if you know, or if you have the subnet ID handy with you, you can use that. And if you don't have, we will see in this video how we can use the Azure virtual network to capture the virtual network detail in this example too, and then we can use that particular variable to pull out the subnet ID, the required subnet ID that we want. And then in the last we can use the same command, and then we can provide the subnet ID configuration over here. Okay, so let me switch back to the Visual Studio Code, and here I am going to create one more file, and I will call it as nic.ps1. So in this file, the first thing that we need is the subnet ID of our existing virtual network. I'm not going to create the new subnet ID. So let's take an example that how we can pull that particular required subnet ID from the existing VNet. Okay, so I'm just creating one variable here, or let me create the variable on the console, and I will use that VNet is equal to get-az virtual network, and then the name parameter. So in name parameter, I need to provide the name of the virtual network. So if I go back to this PowerShell RG resource group, you have saw that we have already created the virtual network, and this is my virtual network. Let me copy this one and let me use that over here in string, and then I will use the resource group name, and this is the resource group. And then I hit enter. Now command completed successfully. So if I use VNet and then press enter, then you can see that it has actually captured the complete information of that particular VNet. And under the subnet header, you can see it's actually captured all the subnet information. So this is the front end subnet, and then we have a backend subnet, and then we have test subnet 1. So we have total 3 subnets in our this particular my virtual network VNet. So if I go to this subnet page, you can see that we have 3 subnets. So let's take an example that I want to use this front end subnet from all these 3 subnets. Okay, so we already have this $VNet variable over here, and this variable contains the complete detail of the virtual network. And from that I can just pull out this subnets detail using this subnets header, and this subnets having, you can see that it's having this box, or you can say that square brackets. So it means that it's actually an array. So we have to pull that information from subnet array. So if I use VNet and then I use dot subnets, then it will actually pull out the subnet information. And you can see that inside the subnet, this is the array. Okay, so this array position or the index start with 0. So the front end subnet, it's actually on the 0 position, this is on the first position and this is on the second position. So if I use subnets, then 0 in square bracket, and then if I enter, then you can see that it's actually showing me the front end subnet. And then same goes for the other one. It will show you the backend one for the number 1, and if I use number 2, then it will show me the test subnet 1. So you can actually use this kind of thing to pull out your required subnet information, and then you can just use dot, and we need the subnet ID for this subnet. So this is the header, and this header is fixed for everyone, all the subnets. So you can just use ID, and if you hit enter, it will just give you the complete ID of your subnet. Okay, so this is how you can actually pull the subnet ID. Now let me go ahead and write this detail, or let me copy that command from here, because we have already executed that command. So let me copy this command, and this where you're going to use this command. So first we are capturing a virtual network, and then we have to pull this subnet ID from this virtual network. So I will use another variable called subnet underscore ID, and inside that rather you can go with this particular approach if you know that that VNet is on this particular 0 position, or if you don't know how to do that, or if you don't know how many subnets are there and you don't want to take that particular risk of indexing an array, then let's try one more thing, that you can just use $vnet, and then you can use where hyphen object, or I will just use $vnet dot subnets, and then where hyphen object dollar underscore dot, and inside this subnet I'm just looking for the name. So I will use this particular name property, and name is equal to front end subnet. So I'm looking for front end subnet, this particular subnet. Okay, so let me do one thing. What if I just run this particular command? Let me see what I get. Okay, so it's actually capturing that front end subnet. So what we are doing over here is we are just using $vnet dot subnet. So it will actually go to one level down with this particular subnet header, and from that 3 subnets it will just look for this particular name property, and whichever the 3 subnets are matching the name property with front end subnet, it will just pull out that complete subnet details. Okay, so if you run this particular command, you will get a complete detail of that particular subnet, and then you can use this particular ID header to pull out the subnet ID from this complete information. So I will do one more thing here, is I will just use brackets, so it will capture all the information, and then I will use .id, so it will just pull out that particular subnet ID from the VNet. So if I run that command over here, you can see that it's actually pulling out the subnet front end subnet ID. Okay, and the same goes for the other subnet. Rather than going with the indexing thing that we use with that subnet and then braces, and inside the braces you can go with the array indexing 0, 1, 2. You can go with that, or if you don't want to go with that, you can just go with this particular approach. So here if you type backend subnet, then it will pull out the backend subnet ID. Okay, so we will have this particular subnet ID in this $subnet ID variable, and then I'm going to use that command to create the new network interface, this one. So let me copy this command, and on line number 3 I will paste this particular command, and On the network interface, okay, I'm just using the same one, default one. In resource group 1, I'm using this particular resource group, PowerShell RG. On location, let me check the resource group location. This is East US, so I will use that East US over here. And in subnet ID parameter, we are already pulling that and storing in this particular variable. So let me copy this, and I will just remove this whole thing from here, and I will use the $subnet ID variable. And then IP configuration, I will keep that as it is, and I don't want the DNS server, so I will remove this one. Okay, so our command is ready. On the line number 1, we are capturing the virtual network details. On line number 2, we are just pulling out this particular front-end subnet resource ID, and we are storing that in $subnet variable. And on line number 4, we are creating the new network interface using that particular subnet ID. Okay, so let me save this file, and I will run this file over here. And you can see that the network interface creation has been completed successfully. And let me go back to the Azure portal, and if I go to this resource group and let me refresh this one, and here you can see that network interface 1, it's created successfully. And if I go to the IP configuration, and if I click on this one, then you can see that it's actually assigned a dynamic IP address. So this is the dynamic IP address. In case if you want to assign the static one, the static IP address, you can use this particular parameter. So you have to use this -private IP address parameter, and then you can provide this static IP address from that subnet address space, and it will apply that particular IP address. In this command, in example 1 command, you can see that the private IP address parameter is not present. They are not using that parameter, and we are using the same command. So the PowerShell know that, okay, if you are not using this particular parameter, then it will just apply the dynamic IP address for that particular NIC. So this is how you can create the network interface on Azure using PowerShell.